Right now, the largest American armada since the capture of Venezuela's president is cutting through the Arabian Sea, heading straight for Iran. The USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, surrounded by guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. Trump said it himself. He called it bigger than what he sent to grab Maduro. And then he said something that no one expected. He told reporters that he gave Iran a deadline, a secret deadline. And the only people who know what that deadline is are the Iranians themselves. Not Congress, not the media, not even America's allies in the Middle East. Trump told Fox News directly he didn't inform Middle East partners about his plans for Iran. Only Iran knows the clock, and nobody knows when it hits zero. Now here's why that matters more than you think. Because if you've been watching this channel, you already know what happens next. You've seen this before. You've seen the threats, you've seen the defiance, and you've seen how it ends. But Iran might be different, and I'll explain why some people think this one ends in war instead of a deal. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you'll know which side is right. On the surface, everything coming out of Tehran right now sounds like a country preparing for war. Today, Ayatollah Khamenei, the 86-year-old supreme leader who has held absolute power in Iran for over 3 decades, stood in front of a massive crowd in Tehran and delivered his most direct threat yet. He said, and these are his words, "If they start a war this time, it will be a regional war. Not a skirmish, not a retaliation, a regional war." And he wasn't alone. Iranian parliament members showed up to their session today wearing Revolutionary Guard military uniforms inside the parliament building, chanting "Death to America" on camera. The Speaker of Parliament, a former Guard commander himself, stood at the podium and announced that Iran now considers all European Union militaries to be terrorist organizations. Every single one. Iran's foreign minister warned that his country's armed forces have their fingers on the trigger. His words, fingers on the trigger, ready to respond immediately and powerfully to any attack. Now some of you are already thinking this is different. Iran is not Canada. Iran has ballistic missiles that reached Israeli cities. Iran fought a 12-day war. Just 7 months ago, Iran has proxies across the entire Middle East. And you might be right, but I need you to hold that thought. Because there is something happening behind all of this noise that completely changes the picture, and almost nobody is talking about it. While Khamenei was threatening regional war in front of the cameras, his top security official was telling a very different story behind the scenes. Ali Larijani, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, the man who actually controls decisions about war and peace, quietly posted on social media that the framework for negotiations with the United States is, in his words, progressing. Not stalling, not dead, progressing. He said this right after flying to Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin, which tells you that even Russia is involved in setting the table for some kind of deal. And then Trump confirmed it from Air Force One. He said Iran is seriously talking to us. Now stop and think about what you're looking at. In front of the cameras, war threats, military uniforms, death chants, fingers on triggers. Behind the cameras, progressing, seriously talking framework for negotiations. 2 completely different realities. And if you understand why both exist at the same time, you understand everything about how this ends. Because this is a pattern. And your gut already recognizes it. 3 weeks ago, Trump threatened Canada with devastating tariffs. He gave them a deadline. The Canadian media said Prime Minister Carney would never back down. Carney flew to Davos and gave defiant speeches about standing up to American bullying. And then, within 48 hours of Trump's deadline, Canada quietly walked back its trade expansion deal with China. The exact deal Trump demanded they kill. 31,000 of you watched that video. You saw the noise, and you saw the fold. Denmark, same thing. Trump said he wanted Greenland. The world laughed. NATO scrambled. Protests broke out in Copenhagen. Then last week, Trump announced a framework for a deal, canceled tariffs on Denmark and 5 other European countries. The deal got done, quietly. Europe, same thing. Trump threatened tariffs. The EU said they'd fight back. Then, one by one, individual countries started calling Washington, making concessions, opening negotiations. Every single time. The same sequence. Outrageous demand, public defiance, media outrage, and then the back channel opens. The deal takes shape, and the country folds while pretending it didn't. But here's where I need to be honest with you. Iran is not Canada. And anyone who tells you this is just another tariff negotiation is not paying attention. The stakes here are not about trade. The stakes here are about nuclear weapons, mass executions, and the survival of a regime that has held power for 45 years. And what makes the situation so dangerous is that Iran is being crushed from every direction at once. Not one crisis, not 2. 5 simultaneous pressure points that are all converging right now. And once you see all 5, you'll understand why that secret deadline is the most important thing in global politics today. The first thing you need to understand is that Iran's economy has already collapsed. This week, Iran's currency hit a number that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. 1.5 million rials to a single American dollar. I need you to let that sink in. In 2018, before Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions, the exchange rate was around 42,000 rials to the dollar, 42,000. Today it's 1.5 million. That's not a decline. That is the financial destruction of a nation in real time. When Trump reimposed sanctions in his first term, Iran's oil exports dropped by 60 to 80% almost overnight. Tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue simply vanished. The middle class has been gutted. Inflation is running out of control. The cost of everything Iran imports, food, medicine, machinery, goes up every single month. And this is before any new pressure. This is just the existing sanctions doing their work, year after year after year. But the economy isn't even the real crisis. What started on December 28th is massive protests erupted across Iran, initially because ordinary people couldn't afford basic goods. But within days, the demonstrations grew into something the regime hadn't seen in years, a direct, open challenge to Khamenei's rule. The government responded with overwhelming force. Prana, a US-based Iranian human rights organization, estimates that at least 6,500 people have been killed in the crackdown. Tens of thousands more have been arrested. Government buildings were attacked, banks were burned, and mosques were stormed. And here's the detail that changes everything. Today, in his speech, Khamenei called the protests a coup. He used the word sedition. That is not just rhetoric. In Iran's legal system, sedition charges carry the death penalty. When Khamenei labels protesters as participants in a coup, he is laying the legal groundwork for mass executions. And that is Donald Trump's stated red line. Earlier this month, Trump told Iranian protesters directly that help was on the way. He threatened to bomb Iran if they killed peaceful demonstrators. Iran reportedly gave private assurances that detained protesters would not be executed, and Trump pulled back slightly. But today, Khamenei called it a coup. That word moves the needle back toward executions, which moves the needle back toward American military strikes. Do you see how fragile this is? Now, you would think that with an economy in free fall and a population in open revolt, the last thing Iran would want is a military confrontation with the United States. But here's what makes this even more dangerous. They've already fought one. In June of last year, American bombers struck 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, including the deeply buried Fordow enrichment site. This was during Iran's 12-day war with Israel. Iran retaliated by launching missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a base that houses American military personnel. Both sides took real casualties. Israeli bombs and missiles killed more than 1,000 Iranians during that war. Iranian ballistic missiles hit multiple Israeli cities and repeatedly breached the Iron Dome. 32 Israelis were killed. So when Iran's foreign minister says fingers on the trigger, this is not an empty threat from a country that has never fired a shot. Iran and the United States have already exchanged blows. Both sides know exactly what the other can do. And right now, both militaries are operating within striking distance of each other. Iran announced a live-fire naval drill in the Strait of Hormuz for today and tomorrow. 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through that waterway. The U.S. Central Command publicly warned Iran not to threaten American warships or disrupt commercial shipping during the exercise. But here's the part that should worry Iran more than anything else, more than the economy, more than the protests, more than the American ships off their coast. Their allies just abandoned them. Iran had planned a joint naval exercise with China and Russia in the Strait of Hormuz. 3 major powers standing shoulder to shoulder. A message to Washington that Iran is not alone. It was canceled. China and Russia both pulled out. They said they would not deploy naval forces to the region until at least mid-February. At the exact moment Iran needed to show the world it has powerful friends willing to stand beside it, both of them said, not now. China doesn't want to provoke Trump while its own trade negotiations are ongoing. Russia has its hands full with its own problems. Neither is willing to park warships next to American carriers on Iran's behalf. And Europe, which spent years keeping the nuclear deal alive as Iran's diplomatic lifeline, just designated the Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Iran is more isolated right now than at any point since the 1979 revolution. No major military ally is standing with them. That is not an opinion. That is a fact you can verify today. And then there's the one issue that sits underneath all of this, the issue that keeps every intelligence agency on Earth awake at night. Since the American and Israeli strikes destroyed key nuclear facilities last June, hardliners inside Iran have been pushing aggressively to race toward building an actual nuclear weapon. Their logic is brutally simple. If you don't have a bomb, they keep attacking you. If you do have one, no one touches you. Look at North Korea. Trump's position is absolute and non-negotiable. No nuclear weapons. He wants Iran to hand over all enriched uranium, accept limits on its ballistic missile program, and curb its influence across the region. Iran says the missile program will never be on the table. Iran says its nuclear work is purely civilian. But the reality is that Iran is closer to a weapon than it has ever been. And Trump knows it. And that is why there is a secret deadline. So now you see the full picture. An economy in ruins, a population in revolt, a military that has already been hit once, allies who just walked away, and a nuclear program that is racing forward while American warships close in. 5 pressure points, all hitting at once, all converging on one regime that has to make a choice before a clock runs out that only they can see. Now, some of you are convinced Iran will fold. You've seen the pattern. Canada folded, Denmark folded, Europe folded. The math always wins. And some of you think this is the one time the pattern breaks, that Iran would rather burn than bend, that Khamenei would rather go to war than be seen making a deal with the man who bombed his nuclear sites. Both sides have a case. But there's one detail that came out of Bandar Abbas yesterday, one detail about a mysterious explosion at Iran's most important port on the Strait of Hormuz that tells me Iran's decision might already be made. And the math behind that decision is what we need to talk about next. Yesterday, an explosion ripped through an 8-story building in Bandar Abbas, Iran's most important port city, the city that sits directly on the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway where 1/5 of all the oil traded on Earth passes through every single day. 2 people were killed, including a 4-year-old girl. 14 others were hospitalized. The blast was powerful enough to collapse 2 floors of the building and destroy vehicles parked on the street below. Iran's state media immediately said it was a gas leak. But here's what makes that explanation hard to believe. Reports came out that the building had no gas piping. Local media showed footage of a man in a green security force uniform being carried out on a stretcher. Rumors spread instantly that Alireza Tangsiri, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard's naval forces, was the target. The IRGC had to issue an official denial. Israel had to issue an official denial. The Pentagon didn't comment at all. And it wasn't just Bandar Abbas. On the same day, a second explosion killed 4 more people in Avaz, a city near the Iraqi border. Then reports of additional blasts in Ardabil, Tabriz, and Saveh started circulating on social media. Iran's state media denied all of them. 6 dead across 2 confirmed explosions in a single day. Reports of more. Denials flying in every direction. And all of this happening while American warships are sitting right off the coast. Now, I'm not going to tell you who was behind these explosions, because the truth is, nobody outside of a very small circle knows. Maybe it really was a gas leak. Maybe it wasn't. But what I can tell you is what it reveals about the state of mind inside Iran right now. The country is on edge. The regime is jumping at shadows. And when your population is in revolt, your economy is collapsing, and the world's most powerful military is parked on your doorstep, every loud noise sounds like the first bomb. And that psychological pressure is the point. Because this is how Trump negotiates. And if you've been paying attention, you've already seen the playbook. He doesn't just apply pressure in one place. He applies it everywhere at once until the cost of resistance becomes higher than the cost of a deal. And then he gives you a way out. A quiet door in the back where you can walk through without your people seeing you fold. That's the secret deadline. It's not really a military deadline, it's a psychological one. It's Trump telling the Iranian regime, I know your economy is broken. I know your people are turning on you. I know your allies just abandoned you. I know you're closer to a bomb than you've ever been, and I know I can't let that happen. Here is your window. Take the deal. Save your regime. Or find out what comes next. And here's why I believe they'll take it. Not because Iran is weak. Iran is not weak. A country that launched ballistic missiles into Israeli cities and struck an American military base is not weak. A country that has survived 45 years of sanctions and isolation is not weak. But strength and leverage are not the same thing. You can be strong and still have no cards left to play. And right now, if you look at Iran's actual position, not the speeches, not the uniforms, not the chants, but the actual strategic reality, they are running out of options. Let's do the math, because the math is what matters. Option 1, Iran refuses the deal and tries to build a nuclear weapon. What happens? Trump has already shown he will bomb nuclear facilities. He did it in June. The Fordo site, which was built deep underground specifically to survive an attack, was hit. If Iran restarts enrichment at scale, every American and Israeli intelligence satellite is watching. They won't get to the finish line. And the next round of strikes will be harder than the first. Option 2. Iran refuses the deal and fights a conventional war. What happens? Iran's most powerful weapons are its ballistic missiles. And yes, they can hit targets across the Middle East. But Iran's air force is almost entirely made up of jets from the 1970s. American carrier-based aircraft would establish air dominance within hours. Iran's navy, while capable of causing damage in the Strait of Hormuz, would be facing the most powerful naval force on the planet. And here's the part no one talks about. A conventional war with the United States would give the Iranian population exactly what many of them already want: the end of the regime. You cannot fight a foreign war when your own people are burning government buildings in 30 cities. Khamenei knows this. The Revolutionary Guard knows this. War doesn't save the regime. War ends it. Option 3. Iran does nothing, runs out the clock, hopes Trump gets distracted. This is the option most analysts think Iran has been trying for years. Strategic patience. Wait for a friendlier American president. Wait for sanctions fatigue. Wait for the world to move on. But that strategy is dead. And the events of the last 5 weeks killed it. The protests showed that the Iranian people are not willing to wait anymore. The currency collapse showed that the economy cannot absorb more pressure. China and Russia pulling out of the naval exercise showed that strategic patience doesn't work when your allies are also being strategic about their own interests. And Trump's secret deadline put an expiration date on doing nothing. You can't run out the clock when someone just told you the clock exists and only you know when it stops. Option 4. Take the deal. This is the option that lets the regime survive. And ultimately, survival is the only thing the Islamic Republic has ever truly cared about. Look at the history. In 2015, Iran agreed to the nuclear deal under Obama. They gave up enriched uranium. They accepted inspections. They did this not because they wanted to, but because the sanctions were crushing them and a deal was the only way to get relief. The situation today is 10 times worse than 2015. The currency is at one point $5 million to the dollar compared to around 32,000 when they signed the last deal. The population is in open revolt. They've lost a war with Israel. Their nuclear sites have already been bombed. Their allies just walked away. If Iran took a deal when things were bad, they'll take a deal when things are catastrophic. But here's the part that makes this complicated. Khamenei cannot be seen folding. He is 86 years old. He has spent his entire life positioning himself as the supreme guardian of the Islamic Revolution, the man who stood up to America, the man who never bent. If he walks out tomorrow and says we're making a deal with Trump, his own hardliners might turn on him. The same Revolutionary Guard commanders wearing uniforms in Parliament today would see it as betrayal. So the deal has to be invisible. It has to look, from the outside, like Iran stood strong, like Iran negotiated from a position of power, like Iran got concessions. The Iranian public has to believe their government didn't fold. Just like the Canadian public had to believe Carney didn't fold. Just like Denmark had to believe they chose partnership, not surrender. The noise is for domestic consumption. The deal happens in silence. And Larijani's statement, the one about the framework for negotiations progressing, that was the first signal. That was the back channel going live. He didn't say that for the American audience. He said it for the people inside Iran's power structure who need to be prepared for what's coming. Now here's what I think the deal looks like. And I want to be clear, this is analysis based on the pattern, not inside information. Trump gets a commitment from Iran to halt enrichment beyond a certain level and to allow some form of international verification. Not a full surrender of the nuclear program. That's not realistic. But a freeze, a cap, something Trump can hold up and say, I got them to stop. Iran gets sanctions relief, not all sanctions, but enough to stop the currency bleeding, enough to let oil flow again at some level, enough to give the regime an economic lifeline to calm the population before the protests become something they truly cannot control. The missile program gets pushed to a separate negotiation. Neither side will die on that hill right now. And the protests? Khamenei has to avoid mass executions. That's the unstated red line. If he starts hanging thousands of people, the deal is off and the bombs fall. But if he quietly releases detainees over the next few months and lets the anger cool, Trump can declare victory for the protesters and move on. That's the math, and the math always wins. Not because Iran is foolish, not because Khamenei is a coward, but because the alternative to a deal is the destruction of everything the regime has built over 4 decades. And the one thing you can always count on, with every government in every country throughout all of history, is that self-preservation comes first. Iran will make noise. They'll chant death to America. They'll hold their naval drills. They'll call European armies terrorists. But behind the curtain, where it matters, the framework is progressing. Their own officials said so. Now, some of you agree with this analysis. You've seen the pattern play out with Canada, with Denmark, with Europe. You believe the math forces the outcome. And some of you think I'm wrong. You think Khamenei would rather let the whole thing burn than shake hands with Trump. You think Iran's pride, Iran's history, Iran's revolutionary identity makes this one fundamentally different from a trade negotiation with Canada. I want to hear which side you're on. Drop it in the comments. because the story is not over. That secret deadline is still ticking. We don't know when it expires, and when it does, we'll know which side was right. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that 6 months from now, Iran and the United States will have some form of agreement. It won't be called a surrender. It won't look like a fold. The details will be buried in diplomatic language that lets both sides claim victory. But the carrier group will leave. The sanctions will ease. And the deadline, the secret one that only Iran knows, will have come and gone without a single shot fired. Because in the end, every country that has faced this choice under Trump, every single one, has done the math. And the math always wins. If you think Iran folds, or if you think this is the one time the pattern breaks, tell me in the comments. And if you haven't seen how this exact playbook worked on Canada, that video is on screen right now. 31,000 of you already watched it. If you haven't, you need to see it to understand what's coming next.